What does a pre-K or a child in kindergarten need to know when it comes to writing? How much should they do? What skills should you focus on that will help them through elementary, middle, even into high school and into their adult life? I want to share some points that will help you to have your homeschool child have a strong foundation in the early years of writing. Also, I want to share some things I did that were wrong for you to avoid. First, let me share who I am before we jump into these tips. My name is Tina Robertson. I've been homeschooling well over 20 years. I have 3 homeschool grads. I have helped hundreds and hundreds of new homeschoolers get on the road to homeschooling. I wrote a curriculum for new homeschoolers, taught new homeschool parents in person at a workshop. I've put that boot camp online now for any new homeschooler who needs it. I did that for 10 years. In addition, I have a homeschool website, Tina's Dynamic Homeschool Plus. I am the creator of the 7-step unique do-it-yourself homeschool planner, multiple unit studies, lap books. The point is, I love you and I have a lot to share with you. That's enough about me. You can read more about me on my site over there because I want to take this time to make it about you and your child or your children. Let's talk a little bit about the writing stage. There were some things I wished I would have known. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I was not a public school teacher. So there was a lot of research I did. And yes, I could think out of the box. And so not being a public school teacher, I'm always looking not just at one grade level, how to teach it well, but I'm looking at the overall learning process from pre-K all the way to high school. So there were some details I wished I would have known about the early grades that some I had to learn the hard way and some things I did right. So the first point I want to share with you when you have children that age, if you have children that age, is to understand the difference between penmanship and composition. Now, composition has to do with composing thoughts. A lot of curriculum providers, scope and sequences, have a child by about 4th grade writing multiple paragraphs. I just want to give you a rule of thumb because, like I said, I want to tie what you need to learn in the early years to how it's going to help the middle school and high school. Some things I would have seen, because if I can see the big picture, I know where I'm going. When I have knowledge, it is power. So I want you to know these things. Now, not always, okay? There are some exceptions. And don't think I'm talking just this is how it has to be, these are standards, because the reason I'm homeschooling is to reject the cookie cutter education and to make something, or the education or the skills is what I mean, to fit each of my children. But, with that being said, for heaven's sakes, we need a way to gauge. We have to know where we're going. That's why I said I like to roll with the details. So letting you see the picture, you can decide where are my children along this gauge or progress or path. How are they progressing? So some providers have multi-paragraphs by 4th grade. Other providers say 1 or 2 is good by 4th grade. Okay, so now let me make the point back to what I'm talking about with composition. Composition means composing thoughts. That's what it is, composing thoughts. It's what we know when we think of writing. That's the first thought I thought of when I got ready to teach my first son when he was 3 years old and set him on my lap. Now, here's what I didn't know. that I want to make real clear to moms who have young kids, and that is before composition happens, we have penmanship. Penmanship is the actual physical act of learning how to write. Learning how to write. So now let me just veer off just a second here. If a child is struggling in third or fourth grade with learning or composition, it could be that it goes back to not knowing how to write. Now what we've done is we added two hard skills on top of each other. They don't have one really mastered. Not that they have to have it mastered by fourth grade, but they really have control over their fine motor skills by that time. Actually, developmentally, children have most, again, like I said, don't take any of this as your child is behind or anything. We homeschool to fit their needs. I'm giving you goals to kind of shoot for. Usually, the rule of thumb is by about halfway through first grade, a child has more control over his fine motor skills. Up until first grade, it's like writing with your big toe. Yeah, you try that. You try that. I did it one time to rein myself in because of my standards for my first one, that I almost made myself go crazy. And guess what? I did give up homeschooling, and I sent him to kindergarten because I thought he was going to be behind. So I want you to understand where that came from. I was just as conscientious as the next parent, but I didn't educate myself. Fear took over. I needed to know the development of a child. Okay, so that's why I said I veered off here a little bit, because I want you to understand how learning unfolds, and development is a huge part of the pre-K and kindergarten years. Now let me make this point. Say you have a friend, I'm just using this far-fetched example. Stay with me. I like using examples when I teach. They really I feel like they kind of really cement points, because I want you to understand what I'm talking about. This isn't, oh, these are my goals, or my child's bright, or this or that, the other. This is how children at that age, a lot of them are very much the same when it comes to development. You have a friend who's just had a baby, and they're 4 weeks old, and they ask you, or they tell you they're concerned because they're not crawling yet. What would you say? Well, first you look at them and you try to keep from doing those eyes like, what are they talking about? But you don't do that because you know that it's a new mom and you're kind and all those things, and you tell her, it's not time for them to crawl yet. They're just 4 weeks old. So that's the point I'm making. If we don't understand the development of a child and what they are capable of and not capable of, I've seen some parents push the writing process where they've actually hampered the development and had to get therapy for their child. I don't want you to do that. That is what I didn't understand in the beginning. Why all these crafts? Why all these fine motor things? What are we doing? That's why it's called preschool. Pre. It comes before the formal foundation of learning. Should we stick a pencil in a pre-K or kindergartner's hand? Guess what I did? But guess what I can tell you now? No. Your goal is, how can I teach them writing in pre-K without a pencil? Challenge on. See, when you do that, that's where you recognize their development. They're not ready yet. They don't have control of it, let alone wonder why they can't stay in the lines for coloring or can't write on the line because they're writing with their big toe. See, these are things I didn't realize or know. So what we need to do now, do we say, oh no, so we just don't teach them writing? No. We teach them pre-writing skills. Now, does it mean we will never stick a pencil in their hands? No, it doesn't mean that. It's a writing tool. We want them to be familiar with it. But what we don't want to do is ask why they don't want to do their writing today. So then my next question would be, what does your writing consist of? Is it lacing? Is it Play-Doh? Is it writing with a feather? Is it strengthening those fingers to get them ready to hold the pencil and the pen correctly? Is it strengthening the upper body because when they write, it goes up their arm and goes up their whole body? Are they on their backs writing on the underneath of a table? Yeah, kids don't like that either. And guess what? Sometimes they don't like getting on their belly and writing on their belly on the floor because it makes them push up and use the whole body. That's what they're doing. That's why play is important. That's why the monkey bars and swinging on them, it's not just idle time. Sure, it's play, but they are getting ready for formal writing. They don't get ready for formal writing by holding the pencil and writing in a workbook. That could delay them. You want to add some of that, if any. After I had my first one and I knew better, I added way more crafts, fine motor skills, writing with their finger in chocolate pudding, Play-Doh, edible peanut butter dough, painting, monkey bars, exercises, music where they can move their body, right and left sides work together like the brain does to get it ready to write. So that's what I want you to understand. Until they're in first grade, about halfway through, they don't have control over the fine motor. So about first grade, halfway through, is where I started the penmanship process. Now, again, I'm not talking about kids with special needs. And I do encourage you, if you don't know, to ask your pediatrician. They can help you with these things. There's things you can do now to get your child developmentally ready to write. It's pre-writing, it's pre-math, pre-reading, because there's some things we're supposed to be doing in kindergarten and pre-K. Just the things that I explained before. Okay, now let me just go a little bit into kindergarten and start explaining what I did there and what I did wrong. Like many new homeschoolers, I had my son trying to write sentences in kindergarten. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Some kids get, every kid's different. I had one of my children that was actually a little more advanced with his fine motor skills, and he started doing better in kindergarten, but it wasn't until first grade that his beautiful cursive that I taught him emerged. And I have some links down here too in the bottom. I have pictures of how the writing process happened. First, it was just a bunch of scribbles, drawings, if you will, scribbles on a piece of paper. And you want to encourage that because what children are learning is that this scribble is associated with some kind of sound, idea, some kind of communication. And we want to encourage that. And then they go into these kind of like squiggly lines that look like cursive. And mine follow the same thing, the squiggly lines that look like cursive. And then it goes into where they're practicing when you're teaching them phonics in kindergarten, and they may hear one letter sound, and then you have some indistinguishable letters, lowercase, uppercase, because they don't know about that yet. But they know those letters represent symbols or sounds. Mine did the same thing. And then it goes into print or cursive. But when I realized this in kindergarten with my first one, I stopped with getting him to write 2 or 3 sentences. One well-written sentence a day was what I ended up doing with him, copywork. Or sometimes I would leave it open-ended. If we gave you $10 today, you would buy, and then he would fill it in. Today the leaves are falling, it's fall. I want to, and I would have him write something in. in kindergarten. Sometimes I could read it. Sometimes they were half pictures. Sometimes they were letters. Sometimes it was just indistinguishable, but I would ask him to read it back to me, which is another key thing. Read that back to me. Read your writing back to me. What does that say? I like the point you're making, without correcting it. Because now he's putting what he's learning about phonics into practice, into writing. In addition, in kindergarten, I still added tons of crafts, painting, and I broke colors in half. I sure did. A new box of crayons. Can you believe that? Bad mom that I am. I broke them in half so they would be little stubby things, and there was no way he could put all those fingers. He only could allow the ones that were supposed to be on the pencil to get on there. Well, now they have these little pebbles that you can even use. I'll have to share that link too, which is great for colored and drawn, and it just allows just the right amount of fingers that are supposed to be up there on that pencil to teach them to hold the pencil correctly, let alone the line. So I had lines. I was having him doing several sentences, so I had to scale back to wait for his development. And then I realized he was on target. He was perfectly normal. That's how kids develop. And so I recognized his need to develop. Okay, so penmanship is learning how to form letters. It's learning how to write. Composition is putting our thoughts and composing our thoughts into one well-written sentence and several sentences together to form a paragraph. So the point I'm making is, even if you have older children, if one's struggling, is it because of penmanship? Do they need help to go back on that? Because here's the point. Composing is hard enough. It's a hard enough skill to focus on what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it without focusing on how am I supposed to form the letter. Now, I'm not saying just because they're struggling that that's not normal. Because now at third or fourth grade, they're putting together all these skills. So some of it's normal. In other words, they know how to write now. They're trying to compose sentences. So that's why writing is hard. That's why it needs a little bit of work throughout the whole day. I prefer for my kids at that age, what they were doing is have a little bit of formal instruction time. They needed the one-to-one teacher time. This is how you form the letters. What is it you're trying to say with your thoughts? That's what we're supposed to do as teachers when teaching them composition. But I preferred for them to have more writing through the day, to rest their hands, to give their mind a break. Okay, so that may help for some of your older kids. But I didn't want you to think just because they're struggling, oh, something's wrong, they didn't get it. Some of that is normal, because at that stage is where they're all these things, they come together and they're like, okay, I have to put these all together. I have to weave it together. I need to learn how to form this letter, and the sentence begins with a capital and it ends with a period, and it can't be a run-on sentence, and it has to be a full sentence, and they have all these things going around in their mind. So sometimes that struggle is normal. But the point I'm making is, if you'll focus in the pre-K and the kindergarten years on strengthening the fine motor, even copy work was one of the best things that I could do for my children. Because this is why. Here's what happens sometimes when we're teaching. Sometimes we think our children are supposed to know this. Now, we know they don't know it because we haven't taught it to them. But somehow we think by osmosis we're supposed to test them and they're supposed to know it. Sometimes as teachers, and I say me, I did this mistake. You may not have made this, but I did. It's one of the things I did, and that is I wanted output entirely too soon before I did input, which is why I like copy work. Model for your child what you want them to do. That's why copy work is such a valuable skill. They see how a sentence looks, they copy it, they can focus on the beautiful penmanship without composition yet, but the beauty of it is that they're already in tune, their ears and their eye minded to, oh, this is how one well-written sentence looks, and it's how one well-written sentence sounds. That's why it was such a beautiful thing to do, to get them to copy it in kindergarten. That was the best thing ever. Every day it was a journal. Sure, some lined, some not lined. After a while, there was no lines, just blank paper with his picture on the front. Because we weren't working on lines. We weren't working on controlling the fine motor. We weren't working on trying to get it on the line. What we were working on was strengthening the fine motor. The lines and control was going to come in first grade. Sure, you can do the lines and let them see, but some children have a perfectionist streak and they want to do everything on the line. If they can't do it on the line, they don't want to do it at all. They just give up. It's so defeating when that's really not what you're accomplishing at that stage. So copy work was one of the best things I did. And one of the worst things I did was to give him 5 sentences in kindergarten. There was no way he could have went through that. He tried and he cried and he had tears, and that was awful. Bad mama. I was a bad mama for doing that because I learned one well-written sentence while he focused on writing and some of the other subjects. We still had math to do. We still had reading to do. He was going to do some writing with those also. The point was the formal part of penmanship and composition, and I worked with him on that, should have been short, consistent. That's the other thing. You have to be consistent with writing. It's way better to have short writing lessons every day than to go a whole week and not do any writing. Because those fine motor skills have to be strengthened. They're muscles. Muscles get sore. Muscles require a little bit of work each day. It's better for a little bit each day than these big, huge steps of overwhelm, and then we just completely seem like we defeated the purpose of writing, of teaching our kids writing. So I'm going to share some links down here in the bottom. I want to hear your questions. So let me just wrap this up and share a few points with you. I want to recap here. Understand the differences. Penmanship is teaching a child how to write. It doesn't mean you completely give it up by 3rd or 4th grade, but by that grade, normally they're just practicing and reinforcing what they've been taught in kindergarten, where they learn how to write. Remember, it's like writing with their big toe. So do they have to write on the lines? No. Are all letters going to be equal size? No. Are all letters even going to be readable? No. Not even by 1st grade. We still have some of this invented spelling where they have sounds they hear and some other letters you can't tell what it is, but gradually it smooths out, as I'm going to show you in the links down there at the bottom. So understand, it's not so much composition we're teaching in pre-K and kindergarten. That comes later. Teaching the foundation, strengthen their skills. In pre-K, let them do as many crafts as they can with their hands. If you don't have the link, I'm going to show you the little half, I call them half colors or crayons. Even those little fat crayons, we cut them in half. There's no way, break them in half. There's no way they can have the wrong amount of fingers on them. Lacing, painting, painting with a Q-tip. You can use a pencil, markers, all of these things children love, and there's a reason for them. Don't rush that process. Don't try to grade them on being on the line or missing a letter. They are forming penmanship. Spend plenty of time in pre-K and kindergarten to strengthen those skills for penmanship pre-writing so they can write when you get to the older grades, so they're not struggling, so they're not embarrassed saying, I can't write my name. We don't want that. This is where it starts in those grades. And then the other thing is to recognize their development. It's not wasting time by swinging on the monkey bars, by getting outside and doing jumping jacks or crossing their body. You see a kid try to cross the right arm over to the left leg and their tongue, and they're trying to think about and do it. And dancing and music is great for body coordination. Why? Because body coordination is tied into writing. Believe it or not, a child really uses his whole body when he writes a physical act of writing. And then, of course, I'm not talking about kids that have developmental needs or special needs. You know, you're going to have to do things different for them. And even some kids are never going to be able really to write well. We have where they could talk into the apps and record their voice and do some of this, but still we can prepare them, we can teach them, we can let them know that they can have a valuable skill. So spend the time in these lower grades teaching them to get ready for writing. And just remember that they don't really have development or control over their their fine motor until halfway through first grade, and that's normally where I began teaching writing. And it was only my first son that I taught print. When I started teaching writing in halfway through first grade, it was cursive. I just went straight to cursive. I didn't see the need to learn something that we were not going to use. So I just went straight to teaching them cursive where the letters are connected. They don't have to lift their hands up. It was a lot easier on the fine motor skills. And from there, in first grade, I start cursive. And then remember, until about fourth grade, that's where you're working up from about first to fourth grade on composition skills. Okay, I hope you got some takeaways from this video. It was nice talking to you today. And of course, post your questions if you have any questions.